Hi, I'm Nathan Litchens from RunWildTV.com, and today I'm standing on a floodplain in the far north of the Northern Territory of Australia in the path of an oncoming tropical storm. What am I doing this for? Well, I'm teaching you how to film time-lapse. So, what is time-lapse? Simply put, time-lapse is capturing a movie frame by frame using a camera. Usually, time-lapse is used to speed up natural events as well as human events such as people crossing the road, cars stopping and starting at traffic lights, sun going down over a city. Basically, events sped up greatly are called time-lapse. So, what are you going to need to create excellent time-lapse video? Well, first of all, you're going to need a camera. I'm using a Canon EOS 60D. Now, there are many other cameras on the market that are excellent for time-lapse. You will need to look for a camera that will either have an inbuilt timer or intervalometer, or a camera that will accept a plug-in one. Now, most cameras can be plugged into a laptop, and laptop can be used as a timer, but what you'll find is, well, laptops can break easily. You don't want to be lugging them around and accidentally dropping them. They're too expensive for that. So get yourself a cheap intervalometer or timer and use that instead. Now, Aperture make these little plug-in timers for Canon, Nikon and other brands. And what you do is you simply set the time on your timer and you plug it into the camera. Or the other option is to use something like this. This is a GoPro HD Hero camera. Now, these GoPros are awesome in that you can actually time them for time-lapse, and what you'll get at the end of it is a video that's ready to go. So they're super convenient. Good little camera, get one. Now, you'll also need somewhere to put your camera, somewhere very stable. A tripod is ideal, but in the absence of a tripod, you can use a small beanbag, a brick wall, anything that will hold it dead still. So movement is just not acceptable, although some people do actually film time-lapse on a set of rails. They'll have a very slow moving motor that will carry the camera along the rails, and you'll get this wonderful panning effect throughout your movie. But I wouldn't worry about that straight away. Now, setting up your camera is also absolutely vital. How do you do that? Well, first of all, you must disable all automatic functions and switch them over to manual. That's where SLRs are excellent. Now, GoPro already does that for you, but with an SLR you need to go through and check things to make sure they're all set on manual. Mode, ISO, shutter, aperture, your white balance, focus. Those are the basic things you do need to check. Now, to save yourself a lot of work later on back in the computer, the best idea is to set the aspect ratio before you start capturing your frames. Now, these days we tend to set it to 16:9. That's the widescreen high definition format. That's the most useful. So do that first, or set it to 2:3 or 3:2 for standard definition. But these days standard definition isn't really used much at all. So now my camera's on its tripod. I've plugged in the intervalometer. All I need to do now is make sure my exposure is just right. So, looking through either your electronic viewfinder or through the viewfinder on the camera itself, just have a check. Now, if you're not sure about setting your exposure, consult the manual for your individual camera and check that. Now, when you're filming in sunsets, you want to slightly overexpose because you want to get the full range of light to dark and all the colours in between. So I'll just check the exposure to make sure it's spot on. Now take a test shot. Alright, looking good. Now, a good idea when you're photographing at night or using long exposures of any kind is not to set the interval to the exact length of time that your exposure is. Now after a camera takes a picture, it sometimes takes a second or two to process it, especially if it's a long exposure and there's a lot of electronic noise. So what you should do is either set it to be a couple of seconds after the exposure is finished, or alternatively, if you really don't want to miss a shot, set it to 1 second. So the interval will be going every second and the camera won't fire the next shot till it's ready. In that way you won't miss any shots at all. So that's quite an important thing to do. All I need to do now is set my timer, hit the start button, and that's it. So while this is happening, have a look at some of these other videos. Now, at the risk of sounding like a cheesy cooking show, here's some we prepared earlier. Okay, this has been photographing away now for quite some time, so it's now time to switch it off, take it back to the computer and make a video.
So now that we're back at the computer, the next thing to do is of course download the pictures from the camera into a separate folder so we can use them. After downloading them into a separate folder, we'll import them into a suitable program. Many video programs will have a means of converting these pictures into frames for a video. Whatever the case, the best way is to select all of them, put them in the timeline and select the duration for each one. Make sure they're all still selected and change the duration to 1 frame only per picture. Produce the final product and the job is done.